Celeste, the indie platform darling everyone seems to be talking about, and rightfully so. Now, the internet constantly talks about stuff, whether you're looking for it or not. Because of this, I kept hearing people talk about how great this game is, and eventually I caved in and bought it for my Switch. So let's take a look. Being a platformer, of course you can jump, you can climb walls, but much like Breath of the Wild, you have a limited stamina meter, and you have a dash that works in all 8 directions. These are the main controls, and while they do expand on it here and there, this is basically all you need to know. However, every chapter has its own gimmick that changes things up and expands on existing mechanics. In the first level, for example, there are these crystals that give you a second dash. This mechanic is carried through the rest of the game. In that same chapter, there's also these moving platforms you can ride along a path. As you get later in the chapter, the game naturally teaches you that if you jump while these platforms are moving, you get a boost jump. They also twist it around, like adding spikes and making you jump back and forth. Another example is in the 4th chapter, you have these green orbs that will send you in a chosen direction for a second and give you another dash, basically 3 dashes in a row. In its own level, it gets expanded upon and used in different ways, but in the following chapter, they introduce a red orb, which looks similar, but gives you a long dash in a single direction. And the game constantly does stuff like this, organically introducing mechanics and then building upon them, allowing the gimmicks to all be an extension of your core abilities, so everything flows together neatly. There are about 8 chapters in this game. Now that may not sound like a lot, but it took me give or take an hour to beat each individual chapter. There are also a set number of strawberries in each chapter, which if you're going for completion, they can extend your playtime. Each chapter has a cassette tape that unlocks the B-side of that chapter that is increasingly difficult. Also, every chapter has a blue heart you can find in the level, and a red heart you get for beating the B-side. Each chapter has a specific theme that it follows, that it bases the level around, from an abandoned city to a haunted hotel to the deepest, darkest parts of the inner mind. Each of the chapters are structured as basically a series of challenge rooms. You enter a room, and with few exceptions, you can see the entire room in front of you. Now, if you die in that room, you won't restart or go back to a previous checkpoint. No, you just start from entering that room again. Because of this, you can die and respawn 10 times over in just a few seconds, taking a minimal loss. Now, we'll get into how the game actually does difficulty in a little bit, but the way the levels are structured plays a big part in the actual challenge. Our main character is Madeline. Through sheer will alone, she's trying to climb a mountain, for reasons not entirely known. There's Theo, a hipster, who's also trying to climb the mountain. He plays support / straight man to everything that happens throughout the story. There's a few other characters like the old lady and Mr. Oshiro, and there's one other, but I don't really want to get into it here too much, because, well, we're not going to get into the story too much. While I wouldn't say there's much to spoil in this game, I feel like it's a lot better to go into this somewhat blind. I will say, however, that the story and the characters are all centralized around themes of anxiety and depression, and everything is handled well, and I absolutely loved the characters in the story and anything that had to do with them. Now, I wouldn't call this game's graphics retro, like Shovel Knight. It's more like they're extremely stylized using a pixel art style. While I will admit there's nothing revolutionary, they are able to clearly get across what you need to do. You are clearly able to tell where your character is at all times, never confusing her with something else. Where you need to jump is almost always clearly indicated, and you can always clearly tell what you can interact with and what you can't. And as you get into the game, you find out it's less about precision platforming and more about the execution of your platforming skills. On top of that, after beating a level, and sometimes even during levels, you get to see art of the characters in certain scenes, and I think that all looks great. Some of the artwork is also used in text boxes to display characters' emotions, feelings, and all sorts of other interesting things. Normally, I'm not the type of guy who pays a lot of attention to music in video games. Usually a video game with an okay soundtrack is good enough for me. I will, however, point out that I did pay special attention to this game's soundtrack. The soundtrack does a good job of capturing atmosphere, whether that be the abandoned city or the deepest, darkest recesses of the mind. While every game handles difficulty a little differently, I want to start off here with a metaphor to give you an idea of what we're getting into. Let's just make a general assumption that all game difficulty falls on a scale from 0 to 100. At 0, we have Kirby's Epic Yarn, a game most people would consider a baby game. At 50, we have Super Mario World, a standard middle-of-the-road difficulty, not too hard, not too easy. At 100, we have Kaizo Mario, which, while not an official game, I think it fits this metaphor perfectly. We can then get into and break up this chart into 5 categories: baby mode, easy, moderate, challenging, and unfair. Of all the games I just named, and a few others shown, I enjoy all of them, except for Kaizo. Now everyone has their preferences, but a lot of people prefer right around challenging, and might I add, but fair. My prime examples are Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze and Shovel Knight. I think Celeste falls right around here. The game's difficulty comes from 3 things: level design, thought process, and execution. Now I already talked about how chapters are broken up into challenge rooms, all based around a common theme/mechanic. But for the rest of this segment, instead of thinking of them as challenge room, let's instead think of them as puzzle boxes, or at least that's how I view it. So let me take you through my thought process throughout this game. Now you enter a room, and before I'd even pressed a button, I was already trying to figure out how to solve the room as if it was a puzzle, using all the mechanics I know about in the game to find the solution to that puzzle. Once I thought I'd find the solution, I tried to complete the room. This is where the actual difficulty comes from. 9 out of 10 times, you find the solution fairly easily. The execution, however, not so much. Sometimes I'd get it right, other times I'd die multiple times. Now I will admit, this idea doesn't work at every moment in every room. The game does vary things up once in a while, and that's healthy. It gives the game some room to breathe. Over my first playthrough of the game, I died exactly 2,400 times. So the execution isn't always easy. However, I wouldn't say that the standard run of Celeste is that hard. I found it easier than my first run of Shovel Knight anyways. The issue is complicated, however, when you get to the B-side. Going back to the graph we made earlier, if the standard game is around here, the B-side is around here. And it's not because the puzzles get much harder to solve, well, kind of. No, it's because the execution of the puzzles is so much harder to pull off. For example, in this room, I thought the solution was grab onto the wall, grab onto this wall, jump over, grab, then jump to the other side, jump over, dash, jump over, and then jump across. This shows how the challenge/puzzle is kind of harder to solve, because the solution I just gave you is wrong. The actual solution is you jump, immediately jump across, jump over, immediately jump across, jump over, dash over, grab onto the wall, and jump across. The actual solution may seem similar, and it is, but you can only find it by trying to execute your first solution many times, and by learning your original idea doesn't work. Also, even when you get the actual solution, you still die a lot trying to execute it, because that's where the challenge of the B-side comes from. Now, for transparency's sake, I do want to say that Celeste does have an assist mode. If what I just described sounded too difficult, you can use the assist mode to slow down time, get more dashes, etc, etc. However, the game does say that this is not the intended way to play, and that this should only be used as a last resort. If not, you shouldn't use it at all. Personally, I didn't even know this was in the game until the Mark Brown video, but I can see why it's there, for those who struggle but still want to see the end. A few weeks ago, I had 20 bucks, and I wanted to buy a new game. So I was trying to choose between buying Golf Story and Celeste. One night, I kid you not, this actually happened, I had a dream about Golf Story, so I figured that was going to be the game I was going to buy. A few days later, I bought Celeste anyways. The reason I just told you this story is because between 2 games, I just picked one at a whim, and Celeste has turned out to be one of my favorite platformers of all time. The entire time I was playing through this game, I had a goofy ass grin on my face. I'd die 30 times in a row and I'd still have that stupid goofy grin. I enjoyed everything, from the characters to the environments to the message the story portrays. Everything is so tight and neatly done, I can't help but praise this game. That doesn't mean it's perfect, but I enjoyed it from beginning to end, from the simplest moments to the absolute struggle. I'm going to give this game an amazing, and recommend it to everyone. Even if you're not good at platformers, this game has taken that into account, and even if you don't beat the B-side, the main game is more than worth it.